How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to another episode of Sip Talk. I'm Pete Sippis. Joining me today is my brother and my co-host, Alex Sippis. And we have a sports writer for the Boston Globe. Kevin Dupont joins the show today. Kevin, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Now, before we get into one of your most recent articles, I just want to talk about how you got into sports writing, what kind of your path to the Boston Globe was like. I know that the newspaper industry is, I hate to say, a dying industry because there's a part of me that does still love the newspaper, but I'm just really curious to know like how you originally got into the industry and what you think about the current state of the newspaper.
Sure. That one question could take up the whole podcast, I guess. But I went to BU in so that would have been the fall of '71. I entered into their broadcast and film major, and liked writing, but was more. There were only 3 TV stations at the time in town: channels 4, 5, and 7. And really aspired to be one of the anchors on one of those 3 stations. So started on that path. My sophomore year, I started to take, which was required writing journalism classes, not broadcast, but writing, and JO 101 and JO 102. And I had always enjoyed writing. I was doing the writing. I was encouraged. I wasn't dissuaded away from the broadcast side of it, but I was encouraged to pursue, this is kind of funny in retrospect, pursue writing because the two are vastly different worlds. But then it was TV contracts were typically and remain typically 2 to 3 year deals, 1, 2, 3 year deals. You may get someone who's very fortunate, gets to write a 5-year deal, whereas whereas newspapers were considered lifetime work, guaranteed jobs forever, which frankly, for many years at the Globe, I've been back now for 35 years. And for my first 20 years back, the contract, we did have a lifetime job guarantee written right into our collective bargaining contract, which got misinterpreted by a lot of people. The reason we had that, and I know I'm venturing off here now, the reason we had a lifetime guaranteed was that for typical of newspapers, we never really got any substantial raises. We would get 1, 2, at most a 2.5% raise. But while management was offering these really meager increases, they were writing into the contract, but you can work here forever. You can't make a lot of money, but you can work here forever. And frankly, many people agreed to it. And I would say today, in 2020, against the landscape we've seen of these last 10 years, but specifically these last 10 months, there'd probably be a lot of people who would agree with that today. So anyway, the shorthand version is I switched majors. By my sophomore year, I was a copy boy at the Globe, in many respects, thanks to a journalism instructor at BU who helped 10 or 12 of us start our careers as copy boys. Not everyone stayed with it, but I was the first of the 10 or 12 that this instructor brought in. George Sullivan, who had been a sports columnist at the Boston Herald Traveler before the Herald Traveler went out of business because of its ties to a TV station, Channel 5. It's a long story. And from there, I just started. So that was February of '73. I had just turned 20, and I was a copy boy. And it took 4 years. It took a couple of years after graduation, finally to land a full-time writing job at what was then the Boston Herald American. And so in the summer of '77, I became a Red Sox beat man. I soon was both Red Sox beat man and a Bruins beat man. And I stayed there for 6 years. I left when Rupert Murdoch bought it, which was at the very end of '82. At the start of '83, I started a staff writing position at the New York Times in sports. So I was at the Times for about 3 years. Excuse me, guys. And then I came back to the Globe in '85 as a staff writer. So I've been staff writer / columnist here for incredibly a little over 35 years now.
Are there any differences notable that were like from the Times to the Globe to the Herald that kind of like related to your freedom of writing, or was one like just not like more fun, like and more enjoyable than another one?
Well, certainly the Herald and the Herald and the Globe were writers' papers, um, and certainly the Globe still remains that. I mean, people often envision that, or they hear that, they think of it as you can write anything you want. Well, that's not true. There are editors. There is copy editing. Everyone is subject to the process, but it's better said, I guess, would be that it's a very writer friendly product. I can't say that was true at the Times. The Times was very strict in terms of style and protocol. Now, this is the New York Times of 1983, 4, and 5. I assume it's very much the same today, but like all papers, I'm also certain that doesn't have as many editing layers as we had then. So that was a in some ways a difficult process. I got hired there on my 30th birthday. I thought I knew everything. uh, and you quickly found out that there's their style. You abide by their style, you know, to the point that if your first name is Peter, but you go by Pete, uh, I would have to quote you as Peter, even though I would have said at the end of the interview, "How do you like to be known?" You'd say Pete. I'd say, "Well, you're going to be Peter in the next day's." So you'd go through these ridiculous conversations with people about their names, and they were adamant about, no, I'm not William, I'm Billy. Well, you're William. I mean, so that just underscores just part of the process. But I will tell you this lingers in my head over 35 years later now. There was an old baseball writer for the Brooklyn Eagle, Barney Kermenko. Barney Kermenko is best known, I don't know, best known, well known for, he's the late Barney Kermenko now. Barney, in his baseball writing days, was the guy who named Willie Mays the Say Hey Kid. So, and newspapers routinely do. That's another thing that's been lost in newspapering is the whole art of nicknaming and headlines picking up nicknames, which I miss. But anyway, I was having this one miserable day after some tough editing, where the copy you turned in doesn't really reflect what's in the paper. And I was really bitching and moaning to Barney, and Barney's just shaking his head. And I'll never forget this. He's shaking his head and he says, "Haven't you learned?" He's got this very Brooklyn accent, which I won't even attempt. "Haven't you learned?" I said, "Learned what, Barney?" He said, "Write it and forget it." And it got me through because I reached the point there that, listen, I'm going to turn it in. They can make of it what they want to. I'm not quitting on this, but they have their style. They can shape it into their style.
Well, I mean, one of your most recent pieces, I think, definitely kind of, I don't know if it even would have been put in the Times, but I can tell it was definitely a writer friendly piece. It was your latest column called "If Cleveland Can Say Goodbye to the Name Indians, Why Can't We Say Goodbye to Fenway Park?" And as a reader of the Boston Globe sports section, this was one of the first times I've read an article, and I just thought to myself, wow, I really disagree with what was just written, which is for me, like, that rarely happens because, I mean, like Bob Ryan, I love all the work. I disagree with Shaughnessy from time to time, but I was just reading this article and I thought to myself, I'm not seeing the connection here. I'm not seeing the connection between Indians, Fenway, COVID. And honestly, I think that's really why I wanted to have you on, because as someone who's kind of getting to more journalism and creating content, I didn't want like a full-fledged debate, but I just wanted to have this conversation about this most recent piece. And so I just wanted to start with the preface of why, I mean, honestly, why did you write, or why did you feel inspired to write this article after the Cleveland Indians announced they're changing their name, and why you kind of tied it into Boston and potentially moving on from Fenway Park?
Yeah, all good questions, and a debate is fine. So I think some people got it entirely. Some people felt some people like, well, This is complex, but let's start with the point of the article. The point of the article that I did make that many people missed, which could indicate that I didn't make it well enough, is in this year that we've experienced, 2020, does it make it easier to move on from things? Which is part of my premise in that there wasn't much reaction, if any reaction, around what happened in Cleveland. After 105 years, I think I'm right. Doesn't matter, I guess. Get caught up in the years here. After over 100 years, they feel they've been forced to change their name. They changed their name. I think pretty much everybody shrugged and moved on instantly. I don't think that would have happened in the world. There's no way of knowing this, but it's my feeling. There was no, prior to COVID and prior to all this loss and 300,000 dead and all the fear that we've been living in, I don't think people would have relinquished that love of a team name as easily. So what I asked, with that being the premise in the Cleveland lead, is if you had to give up things today, would it be easier? Ergo, would it be easier to give up Fenway Park today than it might have been without COVID? It's clearly stated in the piece. I think what happened is people thought it was going one way because of the Indians, and they get their mind. This happens a lot with readers. They get their mind fixed in a certain way of where it's going. I will also say, I don't like bringing this up, but I will bring it up. I don't think the headline was fair to the story. I think the headline got a lot of people to read or to get right into it with a certain mindset. I was not in the piece making that juxtaposition. I wasn't saying if A can happen, can B happen? What I'm saying, I think A happened because of this, because of what's happened in 2020. And because of what's happened, could you conceive differently, or would you approach differently the thought of a new Fenway Park, or the old Fenway Park being closed, a new one being opened, and having it be in the Back Bay? It's clearly in there, but for many reasons, people took it differently. I think the headline didn't help. I also think that Fenway is such a charged issue that, as I've said for many years now, it's really threatening to take away someone's binky, that they're so fixed on having it, they don't even know. Some of them, I think, even look past all of its warts just because they've got their binky. Also, I found in a lot of responses, some of them quite vile, that I was advocating for Fenway. I wasn't advocating, I just brought it up. Personally, I think I'd be very easy to move on, but I wasn't banging the table to move on beyond Fenway. Again, I was raising this. Could you, in our time, be more open to this idea? Well, I got a good many emails of people who totally understood it. A number of them were understood it and said, "You're right. It's time we get it." Well, I wasn't even saying that, you know. I'm glad you agree, but I wasn't even saying something you agree to. I will also say, and I'll wrap up this quickly here, is what I also found interesting among the emails. This wasn't true among the 400 or so posted comments, but in the email, I could tell people were reacting to the story. They hadn't read it. And they even made reference to the fact that it was behind the paywall and they wouldn't read it. So now they're irked. They've had their binky taken away. They're beating their chests. They haven't even read it. So I don't even know if they would understand it if they got into it. So that's something new in the world, right? I mean, in the old days when I only wrote for a newspaper, whether people read the article or not, at least it was there. They could have read it. They might have been turned off by the headline. They might have made a presupposition off of the headline, but at least it was there. They could, and we see this all the time on Twitter. I hear it all the time on talk radio. People saying outrageous things and voicing strong opinions. Clearly they haven't read the stuff, or they haven't waded into it, or they haven't even tried to consider it. So again, you can agree with people were agreeing or disagreeing with a point I didn't make. I was only bringing the question to where we are today. Could you think differently?
Okay, so that was actually really cleared things up for me personally. So thank you. I personally still kind of disagree. And here's why. You make a very good point with COVID and all the stuff going on in the world today. And I also noticed that there wasn't too much kind of backlash or people up in arms about the Indians changing the name to whatever it's going to be changed to. But I also feel like that was kind of coming before COVID. I remember a few years ago they got rid of the Chief Wahoo logo, and so the way I kind of interpreted Cleveland changing their name was it was only a matter of time. This was kind of a long time coming, and I think a lot of people had already kind of been like they kind of knew that it was coming. It's like okay, like we're going to be something else at this point. I think a big difference between moving on from a name, between moving on from a stadium is while yes, a lot of like COVID stuff is going on right now and we're kind of thinking about things differently and what we get upset about. I think that post COVID, there is going to be an irk for some nostalgic feeling to be back in a place that makes us feel happy again. And Fenway Park is that place for a lot of people in Boston, a lot of baseball fans around the country who visit Boston and come to Fenway Park. I think that moving on from a team name is very different than moving from a historical stadium because I think the identity of a fan, of a baseball fan, isn't really for the team name or mascot specifically, but it's the place. Like I don't really see Cleveland Indians fans or whatever they're gonna be named as Indians fans. I see them as Cleveland fans. So the way I interpret it, between like Boston Red Sox fans, they're not Red Sox fans, they're Boston fans. And Fenway Park is a physical space in Boston, a place where residents or tourists or visitors or whoever come and interact with the space and are in this almost you bring up Field of Dreams. Like they're in this place that makes them feel good again. So I think that's for me personally really kind of disagree with the article because I have a tough time seeing the similarities between moving on from a historical name between a historical place where people gather and interact with the space.
And I would agree, they are different. And I did not draw them in the piece. I did not draw them as the same. The only connection I made was the hurt of the year. Would it make you feel differently about this? Over here, they have felt differently about a name change. Over here, would you feel differently today if the Red Sox were to leave the park? I wasn't connecting the two. I think a lot of people felt I was, but I think if you go back and read the piece, that I didn't. But again, part of the writer's charge is always, and I do this. I read it. I read it out loud. I read it over probably 8 to 10 times before I file it. For the usual stuff, grammar, typos, all of those things. But also with, as I say, trying to maintain the third eye of the reader, which is how is that reader going to interpret this? Did I think they would connect those two in that way? I didn't. Had I known as many people would that did, I certainly would have included one line in there that said, I'm not connecting the two.
So are you saying that?
But that's like presenting a case of diffusing a story before you've even put it out. So, and again, I'm not saying this is the whole problem here, but that headline did there's framing in that headline that doesn't exist in the story.
Is there a reason why you used Fenway then and not something else? Like if the Cleveland Indians can move on from the Indians, why can't the Boston Celtics move to Minnesota? Like, I guess why did you use Fenway then?
Yeah, but in
like,
fact,
would we be as mad?
Yeah, let's say it was the ruse of however many years ago now it was the ruse of the Patriots leaving for Hartford, right? Then sure, then I could have brought that in. If it was a threat that the Celtics were going to build a new stadium in Salem, New Hampshire, of course we lived that 30 years ago with the Bruins, then yeah, I would have connected that. But those don't exist. I would say the lingering protracted issue here that many people still consider is, what's going to happen with Fenway. One day it is going to be replaced.
Like 50 years. I mean, didn't those engineers come out like 10 years ago and say it's got 50, 60 years left?
It could be 3 to 5. I mean, it is points I've brought in the piece, and I know this gets off track, is that it is old, it's dilapidated, it takes a lot to keep it up. There's
the investment that the ownership group has put in now. Like, why?
What's
I
that?
don't see any motivation for them to move it.
To move it? I wouldn't say
not to move it, to relocate somewhere else, because there's no property in Boston proper that you're going to build a baseball stadium in.
Yeah.
And
they are buying acreage and buildings around the park.
Yeah, that's all for commercial and mixed use development, though.
Not necessarily. I'll just say that. Not necessarily.
I mean,
they'll have options. I mean, one option would be, and again, people will consider this sacrilege. One option would be getting the city to hand over Lansdowne, buying enough property, and essentially knocking down in stages and rebuilding right on site.
What's the ROI on that, though? Like, are you gonna have the city of Boston pay for some of it? Like, why would the ownership group want to even do that? The only thing I could possibly see them wanting to do is moving out to the suburbs, which just doesn't work. And you can see that in every single development that they've tried, that ballparks have tried in the last 15 years. I mean, I don't think city funded parks is the answer. And I don't understand why John Henry would want to spend $650 million buying a new ballpark when his work's just fine for at least the next 20, 30 years, at least.
Yeah. I mean, again, that is one side of it. I disagree. I think if you've been to these other have you been to any of these other ballparks?
I've been to 23 stadiums. So
okay. So then I mean, you know what it is. So
they're nicer, but I mean, it has no correlation to attendance or anything. Like any of the new ballparks, like none of them have had. You can argue Atlanta, but it's been a shit show for the rest of the county. But Marlins Park, attendance down. Citi Field, attendance down. Yankee Stadium, attendance down. All of these parks, attendance is down. And I don't think it's a Fenway Park problem. It's a baseball problem in my eyes.
It could be. Again, you're bringing in some mixed issues here. I will speak to the benefits, which would be a ballpark now of, say, 36, 37,000 that could conceivably sit 42, 45,000. So let's add on 8,000 seats. 8,000 seats at 80 games, extra 640,000. You can do the math on.
You don't know you're going to fill those though, because you have no idea that you're going to fill them. Because, like I just said, attendance has gone down every single new ballpark. Attendance is down except for Cobb County.
You think it won't go down here with this ballpark?
I think a brand new stadium, you would have a dip in attendance.
But what you're also saying is you don't think it'll sink here, even if they have a bad product.
Well, so the
existing stadium.
I think that the decline in attendance at Fenway is in correlation with decline of attendance in all of Major League Baseball, and here's why. The attendance, like in 2014 when they're terrible, 2015 when they really weren't that good, didn't really have that much of a dip. The Red Sox attendance average has been pretty consistent. And one thing that I've noticed personally, because I spent a few summers working right next to Fenway Park at a baseball fashion brand, and a lot of the people that would come in, I would say the majority of our customers really weren't even from Boston. You have a lot of people who from the South and out West, where the Northeast has all these different little league and baseball tournaments in the summer, or people go to Cooperstown and they always add Fenway as a stop when people travel. You have a lot of away fans, whether it be from Colorado or Kansas City or St. Louis or whoever now, because interleague play, they say like, oh, we're on the road at Fenway this year. We're going to go to Fenway because it's such a historical and beautiful place. And I think that is a huge portion of attendance during these summer dog days, no matter how good or bad the team is. And I think that if you build a new stadium, while you might have 8,000 to 10,000 more seats, I don't think you're going to gain that mass flow of people from across the country who want to see Fenway Park. And I think you're also going to lose some people that, I think the historical aspect of Fenway still draws this nostalgic feel from people in their 30s or 40s who want to bring their kids. Like I was for a class doing research on soccer in England and how attendance is dipping. because there's the concept of the dad and lad, where fathers bring their kids in, and they're kind of losing that. And so, and they've had this conversation, like, if you build new stadiums where more people come, and they haven't seen any progress, which is why clubs like Fulham, whose stadium has been around since I think 1890 something, like it's much older than Fenway. They're keeping their stadium, they're renovating it, it's being privately renovated, and but they're still keeping the Craven Cottage. And one of the teams I also researched, Barnet FC, they had a stadium called Underhill, which was developed in 1907 and was in use till 2013. And after that stadium got demolished because the team couldn't afford to keep it going, attendance has been way down. The product's been about the same, but a lot of people lost that nostalgic feel that that stadium brought. So while the new stadium is very nice, and I've been to it to a match there, and it's a solid lower tier soccer product in England, it's a beautiful stadium. A lot of people are still looking for that magic from their old stadium, and they've said that they don't feel like they're ever going to get it back. And so I think that getting rid of Fenway, you're really losing a piece of not just baseball in Boston, but Boston itself. And I think it's going to draw a lot of people away.
Certainly the potential. I would say this, that if you have I would say the middle ground on this is if you have a good team, I think whether the park is old or new, you will have strong attendance in Boston. That's my belief of the Boston market. You know, when I look at the Patriots, who play at probably the worst venue imaginable, and they still fill the joint, right? As I call it, the lighthouse in the woods. So I think fandom here, and again, it's very difficult to draw light comparisons between football with its 8 or 10 dates at home versus baseball with its 81 dates, and the Garden with 40 odd dates for both teams there. I will grant you that Fenway is a unique niche product. It is a museum now. Contrary to a lot of museums, if not most museums in the country, people do go to it rather than stay away from it. But I would say in the long run, what is best for a team is a good product. I think the magic would fall off considerably because I lived through this with a bad team. The Fenway that I went to in the early and mid 60s often didn't have more than 8 or 10,000 people in it. It was already a unique piece of Americana then, having been built in 1912. There were already new ballparks being built in Cincinnati and St. Louis. So the charm wasn't there because it was a horseshit team. That's why.
So if they're a horseshit team down the road, what is a new ballpark going to do? Or to convert it, to go back on that, if they're a great team, why would you need a new ballpark? You're going to fill Fenway every day anyway.
Well, if a great team, and I did the math on your ROI question, you'd have say 8,000 more seats, 640,000 more people.
They can add more seats to Fenway right now if they want to, though. I mean, that's what they've been doing over the last 20 years. They've increased it, the capacity from what, 30? I have no numbers in front of me, but it's 37 something now. What was it, like right. 34? And they're increasing.
33 and change for a long time, so it moved up from 33 and change. You could. I mean, you're going to spend a lot of money, and as builders will tell you, when you do remodeling, you don't get what you want. Some of the, if you will, evils by comparison today's stadia would be, common areas for gathering, the plethora of clubs and if you will, food and beverage opportunities that there are some, as you guys know from walking below the box seats all the way around the park. I mean, it is claustrophobic at best. So there'd be far more opportunities for building out clubs. I would guess if you could drive those 7,000 people and this is the way these people look at these stadia, if they could drive another 640,000 through the door and have them spending food and beverage, that what they call the perk rate, infinitely, not infinite, it would be a finite number of dollars, but it'd be a lot more money than they're gaining now. And again, what's the balance there of bringing in new dollars against living with a museum piece that they have to pour money in to keep it up? let them do that. I'm just saying, from the aspect of what the park is, having probably 30% of the house among the worst seats in all of baseball. Horrible. Horrible.
That's not true at all.
It isn't?
There are about
How many people want to sit in the green?
there's 7 sections I can think of that I'm like, this is a shitty view.
Yeah. All the
You got
bleachers.
those ones in the right field corner. I'll agree with you there. Those are terrible. Section 1 through 7, I'll give it to you. But I mean, I've been to tons of other stadiums, and the sight lines from the upper deck are not even close to as good as like a grandstand. See, I'll give you, yes, if you're sitting right behind the pole, not the greatest thing in the world.
Sections 2 through 9. If you want to go 1 through 9, you can make a case for section 1 because at
I'm
least
not sure which one is. I'm just thinking the right field corner. I've sat up there. That's miserable. That's a miserable time. I'll agree
section
with
1
you.
at least faces the field. Sections 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 don't. 8 and 9 are mixed. So 30% of the house, 70% of the house, well, 50% of the house has probably the best seats in baseball. Of course, you have to put nets in front of some of the highest price seats. You've got to put nets in front of that.
Give everyone a glove. Let them fight one off.
Yeah. So
I'm so mad about the nets. I mean, that's a whole different subject. But what's your opinion on nets? Here we go. Hot
on
takes.
nets?
Yeah.
Well,
they're definitely necessary. I'll agree, but I don't like them.
They are necessarily. I don't think anybody can like them. I also think I've sat over these 60 years, I've sat a lot behind home plate. After a while, you don't even recognize it, right? Your mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. We normally sit down the line. So the first year that the nets were up, I was like, this is terrible. I didn't like it at all. So yeah, we were at the game though that woman, it was against the A's, the bat incident. It was like a shattered bat. It was a shattered bat, or
it was a shattered bat.
Yeah, so I think that's probably for Fenway why they have nets everywhere now. So.
There's the iconic picture of Jim Rice carrying the bloodied kid out. Took the line drive and.
No, yeah, this one was, I think it was a bat hit some woman. I don't exactly remember. That's a little off topic, but I mean, I don't know how many other. I'm sure you've been to most of the stadiums, especially the new ones.
Most of the AL, NL, not. I was a beat writer for a lot of years with Red Sox, Yankees, and Mets, so I made most of them.
Have you been to Citi Field? Or yeah, Citi Field, wherever.
I haven't been. I've been to the new Yankee Stadium. I haven't been to the Mets. I've been to St. Louis, which I really liked. Baltimore, of course, was new of the ilk. Pittsburgh, I really liked. So I think they do a fine job. I think people would be.
But when you argue, I mean, all those ballparks are just trying to replicate what Fenway Park has. Camden Yards was built to be Fenway Park.
And Fenway Park, Fenway Park is replicating itself in Worcester. It has replicated itself in Florida. And I think it would do a marvelous job of doing that here with all the modern accoutrements we've talked about.
But do you think that those modern amenities are what people think what Fenway Park or these ballparks need, but in reality, it's just baseball? I love baseball more than any other sport. But I think it's a baseball problem, not necessarily a stadium problem. I'll agree. Some of the old stadiums that have been replaced, those concrete donuts that were built in the 60s, those were shit boxes. I mean, look at Oakland. That's still up. That is, I don't know if you've been there. That's miserable.
Yep.
That's
anytime.
Worst ballpark I've ever been to. You look at Toronto. I mean, I love Toronto, but I mean, they need a new stadium. Maybe not right now, but at some point. But all these new ballparks that are replicated after those jewel box stadiums, like, I mean, we have it. Like, these ballparks, they're trying to make it, and we have it. So why would you want to take away something that everyone's trying to replicate when you have an authentic one?
Yeah, well, I've stated a number of my reasons. I also think what really works for Fenway is its site, not the stadium, but where it is, how it's been shoehorned into or how the neighborhood has shoehorned itself around the ballpark. Because when it was there,
yeah. it
was not built like it is today. The neighborhood was not built like it was today. So there's a lot of, again, you don't have to extol the virtues to me. I've loved the place. I love the place even when only 7,000 people went to the games. But it's, as I say, it's a museum piece in modern era There's a lot that it lacks in terms of, as we know, technology. None of us knows exactly where all of this is going in terms of the betting game. We'll see how it withstands betting, or that will be important. But one point you do make, which is very good, is the prospect of attendance sinking more. I would say that's not just a baseball problem. I think that's an American problem, or a cultural problem in terms of attention span of fans. The games are dreadfully long. When I went for a long time, I'm talking better part of 25 years that I went, games you could pretty much guarantee were over between 220 and 240. 220 now, you're lucky to be in the fifth inning. So they drag on dreadfully. And to the point of Fenway, that also works against the experience because the seats are so horrible. Not only the view, the sight lines for 30% of the house, but the grandstand seats which comprise, that's got to be at least 50% of the house. The grandstand seats are small, uncomfortable, dreadful, knee room dreadful. So the experience of sitting there for a 2-hour game or a 220 game is tough. Sitting there for 5 hours is torture.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. As someone who worked right across the street, those families that I brought up who would come from like tournaments near Cooperstown or whatever, those families would come back and buy one more thing in like the 6th inning because they have kids and the seats can be uncomfortable and they already took in the whole experience. So I totally agree. I totally agree with you there. I think we have to wrap this up soon, but I think this has been a really interesting conversation. This is the first time I think I've had anything close to a debate with like an actual sports writer. So this is a really unique experience for me.
Well, these discussions are always good because there is no right and wrong to this.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm a kid that grew up going to Fenway every single day in a full house, and I have the nostalgia. So, and I'm sure you have the nostalgia too, but I mean, maybe you get tired of it after however many years it's been.
No, it's not that I get tired of it, because in fact, part of what I've written for Sunday's second thought this week for the 27th is they asked me to do kind of a review of the year, and I couldn't do the review without mentioning this most recent one. So in '67, when they finally won, they went from this horrible outfit, laughingstock of the American League, finally to winning. I was there on the last day of the season with my old man sitting in the last row of the bleachers, ran on the field and stuffed my pockets full of dirt from the third baseline. We actually rolled up, my dad and I, we rolled up the on deck circle on the first base side, which was their on deck circle, and tried to take it out of this. It was just too heavy to carry. We had parked up near what was the Peter Fuller dealership on Com Ave. So, I've certainly got an emotional investment in the place. There's no question about it. But I've also been there before when it was considered the pits. I worked there as an usher for a year. I also experienced the shutting down and the knocking down of Boston Garden. And what I've come to realize over my long life here is that it isn't the building, it's the memories you have within the space. So that's not the brick and mortar of it. The experience is what exists in your mind. My relationship with my old man, working there as an usher and getting smoke blown in my face by the bettors in the right field grandstand, all of that. That's not what the place, the bricks and mortar, that's all they are to me. It's the memories. And I think for many people that's true. Many people it's not. They hold on to these things as tangibles that it's their right, but it's just I think how you're wired.
That's a great point. I mean, neither of us ever went to the original Garden. I don't think we were born yet. What are the year they opened at? 95, 96, something like that?
Right in the middle of the 90s. Yeah, they built it for a while, then they took another 2 to 2.5 years to knock it down.
Yeah, so we never, I guess that would, yeah. I mean, I guess that would be, like, we've never lived through a new stadium. We never went to Foxborough Stadium or had memories there. So right. I agree with you. We have no idea how it would be if you tear down a stadium and kind of go through. Sorry.
And again, different for everyone. You could go through all these life experiences I have and still be, a Fenway forever guy. I mean, that's just how it, I think it's how we all interpret it. But I think if you live long, if you're fortunate enough to live your life long enough and go through all the ups and downs that comes with losing your parents and relationships and watching teams win and lose far more than win for all of us, no matter what town we're in. And that's been a unique experience around here because culturally, there's a lot of people who are just accustomed to winning here. They watch the Celtics win, the Bruins win, the Patriots kept winning. I grew up in a vastly different culture. All they did was lose, other than the Celtics. The Celtics always won. Patriots were a joke. Red Sox were a joke. Bruins couldn't win. Bruins, they had that great renaissance with Orr in the 60s and into the 70s. But as we know, they went from 72 to 2011 without winning. So it's different. People get wired differently. I've been wired to appreciate the teams and their experiences and their winning more than the ballpark or the arena. The Garden was a great old joint. Unlike Fenway, its percentage of great seats was off the charts. Their only horrible seats, not only, but the vast majority of their horrible seats were second balcony, which in the 70s they turned into luxury suites, a whole different engineering and format. But because of the steep sight lines, these buildings like the old Garden were built primarily for boxing and hockey. So they built them with very steep sight lines. You were over the action. Great, tremendous. I wish more new arenas would follow that, if you will, schematic, but they don't because they want to spread the lines back, get as many people in the building as possible. And consequently, boy, there aren't many new buildings that are really Detroit's a beautiful, beautiful piece of architecture, but not anything you want to sit in. Edmonton, same thing.
Have you been to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn?
I have. Dreadful.
I hated it. I felt like you said, it had the high, if you're up in, I don't know where you sat, but I was up in the second balcony. And yes, it was definitely very steep, very high, but also it was very pushed back. So, that might've been the worst sight line I've ever had at any.
It's especially bad for hockey. They tell me it's better for basketball, which I can see.
I watched the whole game on the board.
Smaller surface. So, but again, it's all an interesting subject. And as I suppose there'll be a Zoom session with some old fool 50 years from now, we'll see it entirely differently.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Before we let you go, anything that you want to plug, anything that you want to promote?
Oh, it's nice of you. No, I would just say, for those of you who don't already subscribe to the Globe Digital product, give it a try. It's $1 for 6 months. Can't get cheaper than that. And that said, I've been really encouraged by what's happened there in the last 6 or 8 months. The digital subscription of the Globe has gone up by 50%. And there are some great digital products around the country, such as the Globe, the New York Times, different scale, Washington Post, LA Times. I guess I'll leave with one thought, which is a free press is imperative to a democracy, underscored emphatically over these last 4 years with what's gone on, the foolery in Washington. And if we don't preserve newspapers, if we don't preserve real news services and a democracy with it, then it will be infinitely more costly to bring it back, and it may not be able to be resurrected.
Glad we can finish on something that we all agree with. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Pete Sippis. This is Sip Talk. Thanks for listening.